Welcome to Out Motorsports, the channel for cars as you are. My name is Jake, and this is my 1995 BMW 325is Spec3 race car. This is the second race car that I have owned, and then I've had another track car prior to all that. But last summer, my beloved purple E36 M3 met a timely death. It had been a race car for a really long time, but anyway, we parted the car out. It is off to the great junkyard in the sky, and this is my replacement, and I switched classes. So let's talk about what a Spec3 is, and we'll take a whole tour of this car because you don't really see a lot of race cars and get up close with them. And then we'll talk about how it drives with some on-track footage and my own impressions. So let's get into it. What is a Spec3? Well, this is a class that began about 10 years ago, and a Spec series is different from a lot of other racing series that have much more open rule sets. A Spec series is one where you get a list of parts that you can put on a very certain car, and if the rules don't say you can, you can't. So we have a very specific list of what we can do to these cars, and Spec3 in particular runs on a 1993 to 1995 BMW 325i or IS. The cars are the same. The IS is just a two-door, but you can have a two-door or a four-door. They have to be the Vanos motor, so it's an M50 with Vanos, and at their peak, when they're super duper healthy, they make 195 rear wheel horsepower if they are super healthy. All of the cars in our series make somewhere in the high 180s to low 190s if you put them on a dyno. Now, the nice thing about this spec class in particular versus a lot of other spec series is that these are built to stay pretty cost competitive. And that's to say, some other spec series are really fun to drive, and they're really great cars, but they were built to be fun, not necessarily to be a budget-friendly car. So when I got rid of the purple BMW, I was not interested in spending $45,000 to $55,000 on what amounts to a toy that adults play with. I was looking to spend a lot less money, so I picked this car up for under $20,000. You can build one or buy one between $15,000 and $25,000, depending on whether you want to do it yourself or have a shop help you out. So you're starting with an M50 with Vanos. You can of course refresh it with factory bits if it's leaking or needs bearings or whatever, if it's a little worn out. Transmission-wise, these all use a Getrag 5-speed transmission that is shared with the E30, 325i, and IS. Suspension-wise, we're running a bit of a unique setup, so we're using Coney struts with E36 M3 front housings. So you cut out the regular insert and put the Coney insert in there, and then it's basically a Coney yellow shock at the rear of the car. Our springs are a set of Spec3 specific springs with a unique spring rate by a company called Swift, and then we run H&R sway bars. You can adjust the sway bar for how stiff or loose you want it to be, but otherwise there's no real adjustability here with the suspension. Now, as far as wheels and tires are concerned, I'm running a set of Apex Arc 8s. We have a little bit of freedom in wheel choice, but you have a certain width of wheel. They have to be 17-inch diameter and 8 inches wide on a 235/40 17-inch tire. And we run a spec tire. So this is a Toyo Proxy RR. You cannot run any other wheel, you cannot run any other tire. We've got a variety of wheels that fit the rules, but the tires are the tires. Braking-wise, as far as hauling these things down, we have factory brakes on these cars. They are truly fine. It's why I tend to laugh at a lot of people that say, oh, I have to have a big brake kit before I get on the track. You don't, you really don't. But we're running better pads, of course. So we have a partnership with Hawk Performance. A lot of racers use Hawk brakes, and we use the Hawk DTC 60 brake pad, both on front and rear axles. And we just pair that to the factory calipers. You can rebuild them as needed, and a factory rotor. So pretty simple. And then of course, putting the power down back here at the rear end is a factory differential, actually. We're not doing a built diff or anything. Those are really great, but again, they add a lot of money to the cost. And we're running a factory LSD. So this is a 3.15 to 1 LSD ratio out of, I believe, the early E36 325 cold weather package cars. They're easy enough to find, they're easy enough to get rebuilt when they get tired, and they work just fine for the power that we put down. Like I said, it's about 190 wheel horsepower. And of course, we all have to come in right around a certain target weight. There is a minimum weight with driver, with fuel when you come in from a race. If you're lucky enough or unlucky enough, you'll get weighed at the end of your race to make sure you're compliant. The minimum weight with driver of one of these cars is 2,825 pounds. It's actually pretty attainable for most cars with most drivers. There's a lot of weight you can pull out of these, and honestly, I have to come in with half a tank of fuel, otherwise I am at risk of being drastically underweight. And now looking under the hood, a lot of people want to know, what do you have under here? And the answer is a factory BMW M50. There's nothing really special going on. Like I said, there's just a couple of fire nozzles. You can see 3 of them there. Otherwise, it's the M50 factory intake manifold. It's got the factory air box with some reflective tape to help with heat in theory. And then you can see here, I've got the ducting here that runs right up to the air box there, so that helps out a little bit more. Just a quick anecdote, you can see this car was originally Montreal blue. It is now, of course, Porsche 1970s 911. It's called Magenta. It's a Mako job. This is the best $400 paint job you'll ever see. Looking around here on the other side, again, this is all factory stuff, except you'll notice the coolant expansion tank, if you know these old cars, is not here. It should be right around here, and it isn't. These are running the European coolant expansion tank that's right here. What that does is it puts this at the highest point in the system, so you actually don't have to bleed it. It's self-bleeding, which anyone who knows these cars, they're a complete pain to bleed, and fortunately with this, you just pour water in it and drive the car around and it bleeds itself. And a couple more things looking back here. We also, of course, have the exhaust. It is more or less straight piped, basically, from the mid-pipe back factory headers, and we've got just kind of a basic muffler that gets welded in. These are pretty easy exhaust to deal with. And then looking around here on the trunk lid, this is a rain light. This one's by a company called Lifeline. It's the best and the brightest. That's what you want in the rain and the fog. But we have to run these because the taillights on a lot of these older cars are not the brightest. So if there's rain and fog and other inclement weather and they call it a rain race, you have to run this, and it just lights up solid, and then it can blink when you're pushing the brake pedal or vice versa. You can just wire it however you want it to be wired. All right, so let's take a look inside my race car. So of course the interior is gutted. There's not much going on here. You can see the whole roll cage. These are welded in roll cages. They're a 6-point roll cage. Mine has NASCAR bars, which mean they extend out a little bit past the body of the car, and they just fit in the cavity of the door there. The doors are also gutted. You can see my Sparco racing seat with head protection, you know, head containment there. And looking further inside, there's some diamond plate on the floor just for the sake of giving you some extra grip. And then looking further up, got a removable steering wheel, as we all do, because otherwise you can't get in and out of the car very easily. Now we do have kill switch and fire pole right here. All of these cars have to have this. The kill switch, when you pull it, will actually kill the electrics of the car all at once, and then the fire pole, if you pull that, will do the same thing. It will dump fire extinguisher of sorts throughout the cabin. You can see a couple nozzles. Looking further down in here, one of them is this little blue guy right there. I've got a couple of these pointed at me, and then I've got a few more over on the fuel rail and exhaust manifold under the hood. I am using a new system that is mounted right there next to my helmet that's flopped over, and it uses a gas instead of a liquid or a foam, so it actually fills the entire space of the cabin instead of just whatever it can touch. So in theory, it's a little bit safer, and also that fire bottle is much smaller and lighter than the other one might be. You can see here I've got all the wiring running through the middle of the cabin. I didn't build this car, a shop built this car many, many years ago, but you can see the red wires. That's my main power wire, and then that red switch right there is my kill switch that gets pulled by the handle on the A-pillar, or I can just turn it down there. Looking further up, all of these of course run that Getrag 5-speed manual. And then looking in here, this car is set up really nice. It's got a lot of switches here for the engine fan. Shirt is for my cool shirt. It's just basically a medical cooler with lines that run across a t-shirt all sewn in, and you pour ice and water in it. Keeps you cool on a day like today when it's 90 degrees in the shade. The DEF is for a defroster of sorts. It runs basically air from the transmission tunnel that's kind of hot and blows it up onto the windshield. TX is for my transponder, and then that final one is currently not hooked up, but it's for cameras. We do all have to run a camera front facing. They recommend rear as well. If you look at the roll bar to the left of my seat, you can see I just run a GoPro for right now because I haven't set up anything more fancy. It works, it's kind of terrible, but it's fine. You just have to remember to change the batteries because they don't last a whole long time. Looking further up here, I've got a couple key gauges. So I've got oil pressure, oil temp, and water temp. As far as oil pressure is concerned with these cars, basically, as long as you've got oil pressure, we're pretty okay. Oil temp, this gauge is still kind of stuck up at 190, but oil temp, they don't tend to run very hot. It's, again, generally kind of fine. And then water temp on these cars, we want them to stay about 190 or so. They can get a little hotter sometimes. This AIM Solo here in the foreground is a lap timer that uses GPS, and it will show you best laps and predictive laps. It is very helpful and also very distracting, so I try not to look at it too much. Now, if we pull back here, otherwise I'm just running stock gauges. I'll move my sweaty gear. You can see in here it's just factory E36 gauge cluster. This car, when the odometer works, has something like 169,000 miles on it, and from what I understand, the motor's never been touched. It's just the original motor that they've done a couple things to as far as gaskets and such, but it's on the original bearings and everything. These M50s are fairly reliable. So there's not a whole lot to see in here, but that is a brief tour of an out of focus, now in focus, BMW Spec3 race car. Alright, so let's talk about racing our Spec 3s, our BMW E36 325is. We are on the front straight here at Pit Race to the west of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and we're about to have our standing start. We've got one group in front of us doing the same thing here, Camaro Mustang Challenge, and in both cases, both classes are going to take separate green flags. So we come up to a certain point marked on the track by a cone, come to a full stop, we wait for a green flag to be presented, held out, and then dropped. And when the flag drops, you have a 2x2 drag race, and that starts your race. So off go the Camaros and Mustangs. Here we go, rolling up for our turn. In this case, they held the flag just a touch long, but you have to get your revs just right, otherwise you're going to spin your tires too much, and you'll sit there doing a burnout while everyone else leaves you. So off we go. I got a pretty good start here. I've learned how to do these standing starts, and you'll see we're all pretty evenly matched on these starts, so you have to figure out where you're going. And this was really crucial here when one of our competitors actually, you'll notice, loses it just a touch, and we have to figure out somewhere to go. So John goes spinning, we go right around him. Thankfully, no one made impact, and now we have a race, and John, of course, is rushing to catch back up. Not sure why he spun, but he did. So as we go down into the first braking zone at Pit Race and take this left, it's a pretty close race. Spec racing really comes down to driver skill and consistency lap after lap. So this is the first lap of the whole race. You can't win a race on lap 1, but you can sure lose it. So in this case, I'm trying to catch Ed in this red Spec 3 right ahead of me, and also keeping an eye on everyone ahead of me. And what you can't really see is I've got 3 or 4 people in my rearview mirrors on my bumper. And I'm chasing Ed, I'm passing Ed, taking him into a braking zone. These cars, like I said, we don't run crazy brakes. We're running just, good Hawk racing pads on factory calipers with factory rotors, nothing too crazy. The brakes work just fine. Most of us have functioning ABS, a couple people don't and have committed to getting theirs back operational, but it's really basic ABS, and it does a fine job. Now, drive. At this point, I'm just playing catch up to the people in front of me, and the gearing in these cars is pretty decent. Here at Pit Race, it can be a little bit of a challenge because of all of the elevation gain. So when you have to go up some of the big hills, it can feel a little slow, but that's how a lot of cars are if you just don't have a ton of torque. And you saw the dyno graph earlier, got about 190 wheel horsepower and less than that for torque. So, coming back onto the front straight, this is a tricky turn. See, I'm kind of fighting the wheel just a tad, and I have a few drivers in my sights. These cars are very easy to drive. You'll notice I'm kind of, throwing some corrections into the wheel here and there, but nothing too wild. They like to be slid around. Unlike my old car, where I was on really, really grippy Hoosier tires with really, really advanced suspension and a big wing and a lot of downforce, that was great, but it could really bite you, and the limits were super high. Whereas here, the limits of a Spec 3 are somewhat low, but those Toyo tires like to be slid around a little bit, and you'll actually be fairly quick if you learn how to slide the car just so, and just kind of let the tail hang out. The wheelbase is long enough, the cars are soft and compliant enough that you can play, and it's really fun and ultimately rewarding to do it. Now this big right-hander up this hill is a really, really steep climb. It's like 5 or 6 stories as you go back up, and the cars feel so slow here. We're just fighting that elevation gain and don't have a ton of torque to give. Now, of course, that's okay that these cars don't have a ton of torque to give, because my lack of torque is the same as everyone else's lack of torque, so we're at least all fighting the same little battle. Now, where I'm talking about consistency mattering here, lap after lap after lap, you can reel people in. I got past Ed, as you saw. You can see I've got someone coming in my rearview mirror. That is, I believe, John. Hell hath no fury, like a series leader scorned after spinning, and he is rapidly catching up. Now, John is one of the original racers of these cars, and as such, he's very comfortable doing everything in them, whereas I am not. So John can get that consistency lap after lap, and that is a huge advantage for him. It's something I'm still learning. In my case, I held John off for a little while, but he trusts his brakes more than me, he is more confident in his car than I am, and you can see he can go flying right on by me, and there he goes. And he can nail a lap over and over and over, whereas if I make a small little mistake, that is spec racing. You lose a little momentum, and suddenly that's all you've got. Now you'll notice a Dodge Viper just flew on by. They moved us into a faster group for this race, where we were with a lot of the high horsepower cars. If anyone is curious, at Pit Race, it's a 2.5 mile circuit. A Dodge Viper will lap a Spec 3 3 times in a 15 or 20 minute green flag race. Very interesting sharing the track with all of them. Thankfully, they were all very well behaved, great, attentive drivers, very courteous of all of us having our own battles. We are out here having battles in our own series with other classes out on the track at the same time. So that Viper is battling some other fast cars, you just can't see them, and then you see the rest of us having our little battle in Spec 3. Now, like I said, these cars are fairly compliant, they're easy to throw around. They are a soft suspension. I like that soft suspension, but some people want something with a little more, I should say, composure. These cars are plenty composed, but they are soft, they are not super duper sharp and on the knife's edge or that razor's edge as you get through a corner. You are kind of throwing it around, and it likes being thrown around. As far as the steering feel and everything, the steering is as accurate as it gets, which is to say totally fine. You're not really invested in the ultimate steering feel of your ultimate driving machine as you're battling it out. The car goes where you point it, and if it's not for a lack of steering feel, it's just because you did something dumb. Now you'll hear me holding the revs all the way to the fuel cut here, and the nice thing, as you saw in my dyno graph, these M50s, for one, are reliable, and for two, make plenty of power right up until that fuel cut, so you can ignore the red line on the tack, you can send it right past 7,000 RPM and just wait till you're right at the fuel cut or a touch before, and you can shift, and they feel pretty good. There's a teeny little bit of power drop off right before you hit that fuel cut, but it is all good. We do run a Spec 3 tune on these cars. I don't know really what it does, but it's minimal at best. There goes another Viper. The purple one there is owned by the owner of Pit Race. Fun fact. So, the cars are easy to drive. I've been having a ton of fun driving this car because it is kind of floppy and loose and soft and goofy, and it is everything that my old BMW was not. The old BMW really demanded a lot of precision in a different way than a spec car does. And the problem with that was that when you reached that limit or went past that limit, things could go really wrong because you would go from having all of the grip to no of the grip. And you were going fairly quickly when that all happened. Whereas here with the Spec 3, yes, you may lose a little bit of traction, you may do some slidey stuff, but everything is in tune with everything else, and the car feels really happy to be slid around. My purple car did not like to be slid around, not nearly as much as these cars do. The other thing with being in a spec series, and I think I would be having a similar amount of fun in any other spec series as well, to be totally honest, you are having a race at all times. I know you can see I don't have anyone directly in front of me. There are some people directly behind me that I'm playing keep away with. So wherever you end up in the field for that particular race, you're having a race because the cars are so evenly matched. It truly comes down to driver skill and, in a lot of cases, luck of the draw for that particular race. The other nice thing, you can see I do have some of my competitors ahead of me still in my windshield, in my field of view. So if one of them throws away a lap or something, throws away a corner, goes for a little spin, I have a good chance of catching back up. And of course, as I learn the car, get more comfortable with the car, I will have more of a shot of that because I will be more consistent and I can run toward the pointy end of the field with a little more ease. All right, and that is it for this overview or review or whatever we're calling this. It's not a street drive, that's for sure, of my 1995 BMW 325i Spec 3 race car. You can find out more about us on social media at NASA Spec3. You can find us on Facebook and Instagram there. And of course, we are racing these cars in the NASA Mid-Atlantic region, and this class is rapidly growing across the United States. We've seen cars being purchased and built in Northeast, Southeast, Great Lakes, all the way across the country in Utah. It's growing pretty quickly because the cars are available. They're available pre-built, or you can build one yourself. You can find the donor cars, and it's good, fun, cheap racing. We are running junkyard motors. We are running, junkyard transmissions. It's just easy to run one of these cars and not spend a ton of money compared to a lot of your competition. Thank you so much for coming along. As always, please give Out Motorsports a follow as well on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Out Motorsports. Head over to our website, outmotorsports.com, if you'd like to join a community of like-minded LGBT automotive enthusiasts and motorsports competitors. Thank you so much for coming along. As always, please stay safe and be well. We'll see you again soon.